whether Matt likes it or not, it's going to be another response to Matt. So on to the videotape.
I was thinking about this, Gary, and it seems like we've hit a dead end, and
yeah, well, there's not going to be any dead ends, Matt. I mean, as long as you're selling something, I'm going to do the don't buy it thing. I'm going to counter argue the stuff you're throwing out there. That's what we do with this whole video thing. So the argument's not ending for me. All right, you can stop arguing, but I'm going to continue arguing.
Both of us maybe are trying to rely on science to prove our point, and that's
yeah, that's not what's happening, Matt. You're not relying on science. You're relying on metaphors and I won't call it wishful thinking, but you're relying on stuff that's attached. People are attempting to attach to reality some sort of glow or mystery or phantasmagorical nonsense that isn't based in science. It's based in hope and wish and creativity.
Kind of silly, because science can't tell us what we're looking for, which is nothing to do with knowledge but with value.
Yeah, and that's, values are derived through knowledge, through understanding, through defining and describing reality. It's part of the investigation. We'll get into it later, but this isn't a word game. I mean, words can mean something if we use them correctly and accurately and precisely. There's no rule somewhere. It doesn't say on some rock, this is what's philosophy, this is what science is. It's just not structured that way. Science is an honest investigation attempting to define the truth, and it can use different kinds of methods. It can use physical experimentation, or it can use, intellectual modeling, creation of concepts in the brain, and manipulating them intellectually, mentally, logically, to discover a truth. And values would fall into that category. They can be logically defended and explained. That makes them scientific.
We're arguing over whether or not nature has a value, and science, at least as it's been practiced up to this point, has nothing to say about that.
Of course it does. I mean, we can analyze nature, we can decide, we can describe it. Ignorant human beings for centuries have decided to presume a creator. Now, once we've been able to detach ourselves from that ignorance, people are presuming a purpose. They're presuming that nature wouldn't exist, or the matter wouldn't exist unless it had some sort of mission, some sort of rational mission, some sort of sensible mission. It's almost a commonsensical perception or presumption, but it's not a correct presumption. There's no reason to presume it. And as thinking beasts, we can analyze it and scrutinize it with, minus that presumption, and find if there's some excuse to believe that nature knows what it's doing.
Your interpretation of the science is that it shows that it's all a horrible, cruel game of, different animals eating one another and just pain and suffering all the way. My interpretation is somewhat different.
Yeah, well, somewhat different isn't very descriptive. So what, it would be interesting if you could isolate that difference. So then we could, have something to argue about, because I don't think you can argue the fact that it is been, many millions of years of struggle, and it's not all bad. I mean, obviously we derive some pleasure in the game. We satisfy our heroin addiction, but that's a key concept I would build into this, is that it is an addiction. We are chasing a need that was built into us, that we did not choose, that we did not procure some way. It was imposed upon us. We are built. It is built into us from the moment we arrive at consciousness.
But there's one thing I wanted to point out that's built in to every scientific explanation, even the most reductionistic, selfish gene interpretation of evolution. It has purpose or teleology built into it. Even if we say it's the genes that are trying to replicate themselves and that's the only thing that really matters.
Yeah, well, this is where we get into the word play again. I mean, we do know that the word purpose should be isolated to missions that have rational and coherent ends. Okay, not missions that are idiotic and insane. If nature's purpose was, if my purpose, if I decided it was my purpose to go outside and spin around in circles and fall on the ground and then bash myself dead with a rock, one could look at that and say it's not purpose, it's a mission, but it's insane. It's not a reasonable purpose.
We say genes try to replicate themselves. Without that try, without that sense of the goal or the purpose or the direction or the motive of this continual reproduction, then you have no explanation. And so,
yeah, well, look, this is again language. We use these words because they make conversation simpler and easier. So we break the rules a little bit. We aren't explicit in our descriptions. So certainly when we say that a natural selection intends, or as you state, a microorganism tries to consume, you can't take it literally. Certainly the sentence could be made more accurate by describing that the microorganism has been constructed in such a way as that it tends to, or that it is inclined or compelled by the physical environment to be propelled in a certain direction. I mean, we can be more explicit. It just makes the conversation more difficult. So let's not play word games. You know the difference between an explicit intended sentence and one that's not intended to be explicit.
So even at the bare bones scientific facts, purpose cannot be dispensed with. It's built into the explanations.
Yeah, well, again, I'll just reinforce the argument that that's not a proper use of the word purpose. Mission has been built into matter itself. The minute it big banged, it was put on a mission. Something was initiated. All right, but the fact that it has a momentum and it has movement, and it has tendencies, and it has something, force behind it, does not imply purpose.
And I think that's significant, that we cannot remove purpose even from scientific explanations.
We cannot, no, you cannot, you will not, all right, but we can, I can. People who wish to be honest and scrutinize nature fairly can eliminate the word purpose from the equation and recognize that the universe is not on a mission, that it is not constructed by rational forces, that it does what it does, period.
When somebody says the DNA, is on a mission to reproduce itself. There's no belief that the DNA has a conception of purpose and is attempting to do something purposeful. All right, it is doing it based on its structure. Built into the structure is a obligation to behave a certain way, but that obligation can't be contrived and perverted into some sort of rational, deliberate act.
And there's no way to dispense with that. So purpose is inherent, no matter how you look at it.
Yeah, well, it's not. Okay, so whatever. There's no point in pushing the argument forever. But yeah, you can choose to say that, and I'll choose to argue with it. All right, because what we can examine is that very dynamic. What forces it to happen? What makes it happen? All right, and we will find when we look at it honestly that what's making things happen are crude forces. No intelligent or wise or deliberate intent.